military spouses are pretty resilient, and we figure out a way. So to say how did we do it, looking back, I still don't know, but we figured it out. So.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And you know what the problem is right now?
What's that?
Woodpeckers. Or to be more technical, flickers. And you're going to see me get anxious as we're recording because I'm going to hear that little son of a bitch out there pecking at my cedar-sided house. Now, there's a whole lot of things having cedar siding in the neighborhood I live in. A whole lot of things that are wrong with being cedar-sided in the neighborhood I live in. But that was the way the house was built. And, folks, if you haven't checked out how much siding cost to replace, damn near might as well buy another house. So if you see me go,
probably cheaper than shooting the bird, though.
You see that jawline get really, really tight during the show. You can just assume that no, it ain't something Camden said. It is likely that freaking flicker out there tearing another hole in the house, which is, hey. You live in nature, you got to deal with nature, right?
And I was going to say, Dad, remember that it is cheaper to replace the siding or to patch those holes than it is to shoot the bird and pay the fine, all right? Remember, they're endangered little suckers.
I ain't saying nothing.
Yep, that's good. We're being recorded, so.
There you go, folks. Yeah, if you are listening to this show and you belong to PETA and you are concerned about the woodpeckers in their natural environment, they're like the red cockaded woodpecker in the Northeast, or actually just the East. Why are you listening? I just go out there and save them damn woodpeckers. That's all I got to say. And speaking of saving, folks, we got Yvonne joining us today. How you doing, Yvonne?
I'm doing well. How are y'all?
Oh, man. I told you I'm stressed. And you know what the worst part about it is? When I'm home, I can get all anxious about it. I could leave the house for half an hour and come back and have a whole brand new hole. Can't do nothing about it when you ain't here. There is no defense. But now I lost my good segue because I went right back to the damn woodpeckers.
Speaking of saving.
Yeah. Well, and what you're doing with saving, I want to get into this. The deploy your dress. Wait, did I say that right?
Operation Deploy Your Dress.
Operation Deploy Your Dress. Where did the idea come from? Because if I remember right, you're a military spouse, so you were not in the service, correct?
Correct. No. My family and I were, though, stationed out at Fort Bliss, Texas, when the idea came about. There were 5 million.
Was it you hanging out with some friends, or did you see something and you're like, oh man, I got to help?
Yeah, no, we had 5 military spouses all in our neighborhood that their units had military balls coming up, and we were trying to find a way to boost the attendance at these military balls. And we knew a lot of times that the spouses weren't attending not because they didn't want to go. I mean, who doesn't want to go to a nice fancy dinner and, dress up and all this stuff, but it's because they couldn't afford to go. Mm-hmm. And so we thought, if we could help take away a piece of that cost, between the tickets and the dress and the babysitter and getting your hair done and all that stuff, we could take a piece of that cost away, then maybe we would be able to help people get to these events that are very important in the camaraderie building and the tradition upholding of the military communities.
How did you get from, how did you get from seeing that problem and going, right, here's how we want to attack it, because you could have been, I don't know, handing out tickets is the right idea, but, door knocking out there and trying to get folks out there, like, hey, drop the dress code down. There's other ways you could have attacked it. What led you to this option?
So dropping the dress code down was never going to be an option. This is the tradition in the military community, right? It's tradition for the service member to wear their nice fancy uniform and for the spouse to dress up well as well. So what we thought is that some of us have these extra dresses hanging in our closets that we're either never going to wear again, or we can't wear more than one dress at a time, right? So we thought that we were just going to collect a couple hundred dresses from our friends and neighbors and put them in the community center on post to offer to anybody that needed it. We had reserved the community center for a 2-day event on one weekend that was going to be coming up in that February. And we'd give our dresses away and then go about our daily lives. The American public had a different plan for what Operation Deploy Your Dress was going to do. We had a little bit of national media attention very early on, and our 200 dress goal ended up being 3,000 dresses before we knew it.
Oh my gosh.
The dresses weren't going to go away in a weekend. The garrison commander on post, who's like basically the mayor of the installation, he said, "Hey, the gift shop on post just closed down. Why don't you come by my office? I'll give you the keys. You can put your dresses there and you can use that space until you give your dresses away." What I don't think he realized is 3,000 dresses are like a bunch of rabbits, and they're going to keep multiplying even as you're giving them away. And so 9 years later, we still have keys to a gift shop on post that closed down at one point. So it accidentally happened. We saw the need. The American public had the desire to help, and saw that they had things to fill that need. And it just kind of snowballed from there.
What would you say was the desired outcome, I guess, is how I'm thinking about it. When you and your friends, the 5 of y'all, got together and said, "All right, let's do this." What, already, I mean, beyond your wildest dreams, but what was originally, what'd you hope to do and see?
We had this idea once we saw that, okay, there's this need there and we need to make this into something more than a 2-day event. We had this fantasy, I guess, of having us be the most fun place to volunteer on a military installation. And we'll keep giving dresses away and helping people get to military balls and proms and homecomings and all those special events that help our community plug into the communities in which they're planted. That was our goal. We had these pillars that we kind of thought up, the pillars for the foundation of this. And it was going to be that we were going to, of course, be a great place to volunteer, that we were going to uphold camaraderie and tradition, and that we were just going to build a community around good, right? That was the goal. The goal was all positive and just, let's give away some dresses, let's do good, and let's allow these families to get to these events that are very important for them, throughout their time in that installation. Never thought that it would become what it is now, but we're very happy that it has.
How did you deal with the growth of the community? Because I think that's an interesting thing, and we talk about it in business all the time. It's like all of a sudden you get all these sales. And it's like, okay, shoot, now I actually got to put the products together. Like that's a whole thing. But you're talking about building a community, 100 people, that's a decent sized community. You start talking about thousands and thousands of dresses, plus all the people that are just supporters, all like that grows very quickly. What did you do to kind of keep control over that community and, be intentional about it?
So I joke around that the way that I've run Operation Deploy Your Dress is the same way that I've raised my children. And it's just being the bumpers on a bowling lane and keeping them out of the gutters, right? Yep. It's the same thing that I've done with Operation Deploy Your Dress. This is kind of almost like a living, breathing organism of itself, that with so many people that have jumped in and wanted to be a part of it, it's us trying to just look at the opportunities as they come to us and say, okay, is this, let's look at this from all angles, and what will the headlines be? If it's going to be something negative, then we're going to have to pass, even if the intentions are true. But if it's going to be good and positive for not only the organization, but the community we're trying to support, then let's figure out a way to do it. And so it's really been a lot of discovery, learning along the way. I joke around, but in all seriousness, we Googled our way into figuring out how to run a nonprofit, how to set up a nonprofit. Because the 5 of us, we didn't have experience in that, right? But Military spouses are pretty resilient, and we figure out a way. So to say how did we do it, looking back, I still don't know, but we figured it out. So
I'm curious, Dad.
Go
If
ahead.
I could jump on something, because you and I were actually talking about this the other day. You've given me this advice probably 2 or 3 different times in the rugby coaching world. Of it's like, well, don't stress about it because you only have to be a week ahead of the practice plan. Like as long as I'm ready to coach next week, then I can coach this week. We're kind of there. What do you do, Yvonne, to maintain your confidence with that? Because that's the thing that I think is tricky. Is if as true as that is, because that is very true. That's a great piece of advice. There is still this little bit of like imposter syndrome of like, what if they start asking about 2 weeks ahead? What if we grow too fast? What if I'm anticipating wrong? There's a lot of weird things there that can eat away at your confidence. How did you balance that?
I will tell you that I'm not always super confident that I'm making the right decision, right? But I have to trust my gut sometimes and just know that the intentions are pure and move forward with a decision that's being made and maybe cross my fingers every now and then. There are some times that people reach out and say, hey, we would love a shop on this installation. And I can't immediately react and give them that shop on that installation, whether it be, we have one shop overseas, but our overseas shop has been very difficult to not to manage. We've got great managers of military spouses out there, but just to support in the way that we're able to support the shops here in the States. And so to put another shop overseas is a little, we're a little more cautious with that because we want to make sure that we're always keeping our shops to the standards that we want them at, right? We don't ever want to skimp just to have another shop. And so that's my answer. There's not always confidence, but I am always confident in the fact that everything that myself and the team are doing is for the right, pure intentions, and we're going to figure it out.
Speaking of figuring it out, how'd you figure out who's going to do what? Because, I'm picturing, pardon my male chauvinism here, I'm picturing 5 women sitting around drinking a glass of wine and say, hey, what if we did this? No different than a bunch of guys sitting around drinking beer, right? Hey, what if we did this sort of thing?
And they all want the same job, right?
Yeah. Did you draw straws or?
Yes, and I drew the short end. Just kidding.
Well, in all seriousness, truthfully, somebody, that's a very, very, very standard leadership policy. Somebody's got to be in charge, right?
So I will tell you that it kind of just shook out, right? Like I remember clearly on our first big opening at Fort Bliss, the 5 of us were there. We were taking pictures. The media was there. And they said, okay, we need to interview one of you. And all 5 of us are literally standing side by side, and 4 stood back and I was still standing. And so I was the one that did the interview.
That's what you were going to say. You went, where'd everybody go?
And they've all been always so amazing at supporting, not just me, but us supporting each other and supporting Operation Deploy Your Just as a whole. But I kind of just became the person that did the interviews because I did that one. So, well, if you've done it once, try and do this one, and you kind of just become more and more comfortable with it. So that became my role. And then, it was more of one of them had a full-time job. So she said, I can't be hands-on up front all the time, but I can do a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So she took on like the financial side of it. She could do that in her spare time after work. And another person was great at doing, this. And so she took on the operation side of it. Another person was great at social media. So we kind of just tried to find what our own personal strengths were. And there was never any tug of war over who was going to be what or whatever. It just really, we lucked out as a group, and it just really kind of shook out this way.
That's awesome. I'm curious though. Then, how did you grow it beyond that? Because I could totally picture this. I think, Dad, you always use the example of like the dining room table type business, where it's like you got the 4 people that are just all in sync and it is all perfect. And then now you're talking about, like you said, opening up another store on a base in Stuttgart, Germany. Let's just say, they're looking at all this kind of stuff, and it's like that is a very different type of team now. How did you go through that growth?
So the growth has all happened for at least each of our shops has all happened a little bit differently. The very first growth was I was actually 6 months after we started Operation A Player Dress at Fort Bliss. I was moving with my family across the country to Fort Eustis, Virginia. And so we said, let's see
And
if this will work.
that wasn't a business move, right? That was
No,
Uncle Sam, right?
it was a PCS, a permanent change of station. We were being sent to Virginia. We don't usually get to choose when it's time to go. I can't say, but I just started this really cool thing here and I want to stay and play with my friends, you know. I had to go. And so we said, let's see if this will work someplace else. So I reached out to the installation there, to the spouses club of the installation, and said, hey, this is what we do at Fort Bliss. Is this something that you think might work there and that you might be willing to let us try? And they were all for it, absolutely. And we actually needed a place to kind of push off donations anyway and to send mail to. And so we put out a new address, and the Spouses Club at Fort Eustis actually reached out to some sergeant majors that they had on the installation and said, can you help us build some racks? I mean, because free dresses doesn't exactly bring in a lot of money, right? So we have to be very resourceful on how we build out our spaces as well. So by the time I got there, we had racks built into a building that they had found us on post, and we had dresses coming in, and we were setting up a shop before I knew it. And so that when I was able to be the boots on the ground there to set up that shop and to open that shop, it worked well. And then, you know, word travels very quickly in the military. So somebody reached out and said, hey, I hear you're doing this thing. We have this program in Washington State, and theirs was a borrow and return program. And they were like, we'd love to turn it into what you do, where you give the dresses to them free of charge and let them keep them. Would you be willing to turn our program into an Operation A Player Dress? So that's how that one came about. And everyone has kind of just had its own little special story along the way. But it's all been through a lot of word of mouth. The Military Spouse Network and community is an amazing network of doers. And so we've just grown, and we now have 15 shops. We just opened our 15th shop 2 weeks ago on military installations around the country and in Europe.
Do you have any, is everybody still volunteers, or do you have somebody working that?
We are all still 100% volunteers. The cool thing about that is that the people that are there is because they want to be there, right? They're working with us. They're volunteering their time. They're really building this community of a sisterhood around what we're doing. And they're also a lot of times military spouses who maybe don't have time to have a full-time job because they still have children at home. They still have other obligations. So they're able to give 5-10 hours a week to Operation A Player Dress, but they don't have 40 hours a week to give to a job. But what they're able to also do through Operation A Player Dress is gain these skills and these this experience that they wouldn't maybe be getting if they didn't have this volunteer opportunity. So, you know, they're running a store, they're keeping an inventory, they're managing employees, whether they're paid employees or not. There's so much that goes along, you know, they're running the social media for it. There's so much that goes to running an Operation A Player Dress that these spouses and volunteers and team members are able to gain during their time that they have to give to us.
I would love to dive deeper into the volunteer stuff, because that's actually something with the Engage Foundation, with my work here in Tucson. This fall season is our first year paying coaches, and this is a big idea that in the rugby community is very controversial. Should you be paying or not? Should it all be volunteer based because you want that drive, you want people with that passion? And I think there's a lot of interesting cases, ways to look at it from both directions. I'm interested to hear, Yvonne, what are some of those things that you run in, whether barriers you run into or issues with people and whatever it is of it's like, gosh, it would be nice to kind of have somebody paid, or gosh, maybe we need to start doing a little bit of something to pull more people in. What are you seeing with that?
You know, I joked around that that free dresses doesn't exactly bring in a lot of money. So if we were able to pay people, we wouldn't be able to pay them much. So I think that, you know, there would be those times that it would be like, why am I going in for this much money? You know, that would never be that driving motivation to get them to come in. They are truly coming in because it's what's speaking to their heart and their soul of why they want to be a part of this. The things that I see with our shop managers and our volunteers are all positive. And it's not that I don't want to give them money. It's not that they're not worth gold, right? Like that's not the case at all. I don't take any money to run this organization either. Every bit of money that we receive goes back into the organization to make sure that it continues to run, that we're able to continue to grow it so that we can help more military families. So, yeah, I mean, we haven't had those issues that you sometimes see with volunteer organizations where you maybe can't find somebody to work something or whatever. We've always had the volunteer force there. A lot of times, even when a spouse moves from one place where we have a shop and they're moving someplace else, they're immediately reaching out and saying, "Hey, I'm so bummed that I'm leaving Fort Irwin, California, but I'm going to be at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and I want to be involved still." I recently had a spouse who's running one of our shops, and she said, "I'm going to be leaving likely in the next 6 to 8 months. I'm going to be moving to where you don't have a shop, but if there's a way for me to work virtually and still help the organization, I still want to be involved. I still want to be plugged in." So I think for a volunteer community, it's about making sure that you're continuing to give back to those who are giving so much to you. And it doesn't always have to be tangible things, but just that appreciation and them knowing that they're making a difference in your organization. And, it's not anything that I would ever be able to, at least not at this point, to pay somebody enough that it would be worth their while to be able to do. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I think it's one of those. Every nonprofit is different, just like every business. And so I think it's such an interesting thing because then the thing that was a big problem in not necessarily a big problem. I think might have been anticipating the big problem as I should be as one of the leaders. But what I wanted to avoid is the idea of this kind of like toxic nonprofit environment that you get a lot. My favorite nonprofit to not specifically reference on the show, Dad, I'm talking about in town here that my lovely wife worked at. That there's cultures in a lot of nonprofits where though I always love to call it the cute kid effect. That like the cute kid effect is your paycheck. And it's like, yeah, you're making some money, but you're working overtime, you're doing all this kind of stuff. And it's like, but look at the cute kid we just fed and all this and you wind up kind of using that and draining that from people. And so what you wind up with, and this is the rugby community's problem, is you wind up with somebody who, in the rugby community, in that case, volunteering their time for years and years and years and doing all of the work and then, just completely being burnt out and leave it. And, in that nonprofit community, similar type of thing, but of like, hey, I want to buy a house one day. I want to have a family. I want to grow my life. I can't just take this paycheck for my entire life. I have to have some growth opportunities. And it's that weight of that like toxic nonprofit idea of it's like, well, the mission is so important that it doesn't matter. I'm curious just what your thoughts are on that. Cause it seems like you still have that really great community and, it's, I guess part of me is wondering, it's okay, what makes that community so different that you don't have that problem? Because that's a great lesson to learn, right?
So, I mean, for our volunteers, we have some very basic asks and guidelines around them, but we do give them a lot of control of how their shop, how their branch, or whatever you want to call it, is run, right? So it's, somebody may say, "I want to be there, I want to be the shop manager, but I know the previous person gave 30 hours a week. I don't have 30 hours a week to give." And we say, "Look, this is what we ask of you, and anything above that is gravy," right? So it might be like for us, it's you have one opening a month, one of them on a night or a weekend, so that you can support people who work, because a lot of times military spouses will open the shop during the day, during the week, right? And so make sure that you hit other people's shopping time availability as well. We ask that they, when they're posting on social media, that they use our logo, like very basic stuff. But if somebody wants to be open 5 days a week, we're not going to say, "No, you can't do that." But,
Right.
So it's just, I think for us, it's being able to have some structure and guidelines to it because people want some guidance, but also giving them some flexibility to make this their own and really feel an ownership over what they're doing.
Love that.
So what's the flip side? and here's what I mean. You've given us we had national media coverage. We opened the door and in walks whoever, Nora Roberts. There we go. I actually thought of somebody that's national media.
We have been on her show. Yes.
Yeah. So in walks her, on day one, and everything you've painted this beautiful picture of, well, this happened and this happened, and I hate to be the cynical one in this, but I also want to know the truth to it, right? Because surely it hasn't all been coming up roses every time. And can you share with us some of those roadblocks you've encountered? That sergeant major that goes, "What? You're going to do that? No way," or whatever.
So yeah, of course, it's not always rainbows and butterflies, right? Like we've had to discover some things are along the way. There have been times that I think we're seen as a much bigger organization than we actually are. So people expect that we can do more than we can actually do. I've joked around. We've said that, like, if you actually looked at us at the national level of what's running what's the brain behind this whole beast that's been growing, you would pull back a curtain. It would be like the Wizard of Oz, and we'd just be pumping away there on like a little machine, like a couple of people just making it all happen on this machine. So it's not always easy, right? Especially when you're so thin, at the national level behind the scenes. It's not always easy. We have, like I said, we've had people that feel, I think, that we're bigger than what we are. So when we go into an installation, we usually team up with another organization that's already established there. So a spouses club, an armed services YMCA, something like that, that's already established on that organization, and they become our umbrella on that organization or on that installation, so that we're not having to go through all the hoops and to jump through all the hoops that it takes to operate on a military installation. Most of those partnerships have been amazing and continue to be amazing years and years later. With a spouses club, that board changes over every single year. So you may have had a great relationship with the board that brought you in, and it's all volunteer based as well, but you may have had a great relationship with the board that brought you in, and they saw all the value and the wonderful things that you're doing. And then the next board comes in and somebody feels like you're taking their spotlight and that you're, things like that. So we have definitely had to deal with those kinds of things. We had to completely sever a relationship and move someplace else because of just that. So, but again, we've dealt with, at this point, probably 100 different relationships if you count a spouses club who changes over every single year. So some of these shops have had 10 different relationships already, right? So we've dealt with probably 100 relationships, and we've had that happen one time. So it wasn't pretty, it wasn't fun to deal with, but it taught us a lot, right? It taught us that our model works and is great, but there is a flaw there that we have to be aware of and we have to be prepared for.
What would you say is the secret to maintaining those relationships and those kind of things? Like, and this is that might be your genius. It's like, hey, that's what I'm good at. I'm on the phone with all those folks, making sure everyone's happy with those things. What is it that helps you to bat such a great percentage when it comes to those relationships?
Keeping an open line of communication. And it's not always easy because I'm not there. I'm not on every single installation. I'm not on every single installation every month, sometimes not even every year. Again, we don't have a big budget. So for me to be able to travel to every single place isn't always feasible. So I have to be able to build relationships with people over and over and over again, even from thousands of miles away. And that's not always easy, but communication is definitely key. Reaching out from the very beginning, whenever that board changes over, letting them know who you are, how to get a hold of you if there's any issues, so that they're not like, we're having this issue and we don't even know who to talk to, blah, 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 blah. They know immediately, we have this issue, I'm going to call, I'm going to squash this before it becomes anything bigger. And so, just as many things in life, right, communication is key.
What's the sorry, I lost my train of thought, woodpecker.
Need me to jump in?
Well, it's back. There it is.
There we go. Good ones always come back.
Won't let them come. how do you balance and managing your time? Because it ain't paying you nothing. And I'm sure there's a significant amount of time required given, but we'll say given to it, but you gotta keep the roof over the head. How are you, yeah, I'll just leave it at managing your
Yeah.
time.
So I do have a job that does pay me, which is helpful, right? It basically pays me and allows me to be able to do these things. Um, and I do a lot of stuff. I don't know. I think I've diagnosed myself with ADHD, and this is not a joke. Like this, I mean, I have a son who has ADHD. I know all about it, but I'm pretty convinced that it just wasn't the fad thing to diagnose when I was little. And the cool thing about people with ADHD is they're great at doing lots of things at one time, right? And I think I find a lot of connections and lines that are drawn between things that I have to do for work or things that I have to do in other parts of my life to Operation Deploy or Dress. And I do a lot of those connecting so where I'm able to, kill two woodpeckers with one stone, right? Like but not the endangered ones. But I'm able to tackle multiple things at one time because of that ability to kind of maybe see things differently than somebody else would be able to see them.
How do you make sure you're doing enough then? Because that's always the thing that I think about. I'm the same way. I've got all my different rugby. I got the business. I got business ideas. I got the wife. I got projects. I got all this. And for me, my biggest struggle with that, as much as I love being in that environment, is it's always like, gosh, I could do a little bit more. I could watch more film before I get out to practice. I could work on this paper right now. Whatever it is, it's like there's always, I always love the phrase of there's always work to do on the farm, right? Well, I've got 5 farms. So it's like there's lots of things pulling you in all these different directions. How do you kind of either keep your composure or, make sure that you're accounting for those things properly?
So honestly, I never feel like I'm doing enough, which is probably
Okay.
what
Not just me. We're good.
it's probably what keeps you driving, right? I think
Yeah.
when you feel like you're doing enough, you sit back on your heels, and that's when you get taken off your feet. So I think it's a comfortable and a healthy thing to not feel like you're doing enough. I mean, as long as I'm not, in the fetal position in a corner freaking out about it, as long as I'm still pushing forward and driving. For me, I think that's very healthy for me to not feel like I'm doing enough. I don't want to be too comfortable in life. I want to be happy. I want to be healthy. I want to be successful, but I don't want to be too comfortable in life because that's whenever I think I stop being effective.
Well, I'm not going to turn this into a coaching session, but I want to turn it into a sharing session, because what is your measure then that you haven't spent too much time in Operation Deploy Your Dress, or not enough time, or sacrifice time with your son, whatever those things may be? How are you measuring that so that other folks can say, well, look at all these things that Yvonne has going on, and she's doing a good job of managing herself?
So I don't think that it's necessarily a measure. I think that I always have a prioritized list, right? And so in any situation that I have going on, I may have 5 things at one time, and I prioritize them, and I start at the top with it's got the highest priority, and I work my way down. And if I don't get to number 5, I have to be okay with the fact that I didn't get to number 5, or that I had to kind of give it half effort, give it partial effort, right? And I have to be okay with that. But, I know that a lot of times people say it, but it is true. My family will always be my priority. If there's something that comes family, that's going to be number 1. And if that has to push something else down, and maybe, they get only a 20-minute phone call on the way from me driving from home to a cross-country meet, then that's what has to happen, instead of me sitting in front of a computer and doing a Zoom call with them, right? Like there's going to have to be give and take in order for that prioritized list to be taken care of, and some of those things are going to have to get less of my time.
The thing I'd add to that, just, again, not the coaching and the sharing though, is because I actually had a conversation with my wife about this last night. It's this interesting thing with my rugby coaching, and I think this goes back to what you were saying, Yvonne, of just open communication. But of whenever I'm missing something and I feel bad about missing it, I'm like, gosh, I wish I was doing more. If you're always communicating that with your boss or your head coach or whatever it is, then you're usually going to be in a good spot with that, because they will let you know if they really need you for things. They'll let you know if you're actually, doing too much in other areas, or we need a little bit more of you, or those kind of things. If you have that open communication going, even if it's just sharing that, hey, I'm a little worried I might not be doing enough here. When you have that open communication, it's a lot easier for that person to go, no, actually, hey, you are doing enough, or hey, I could really need you to pick this up, or whatever it is. It starts that dialogue. I think that is so key to it also.
But and I think on that, it's something that I struggle with, but I try to get better and better at is being able to delegate and or ask for help, right? I'm not always a good person to ask for help, because it's sometimes seems like it's less work for me to just figure out how to do it myself than to ask for the help. But people are there. People want to help. People want to be involved. And so being able to hand some things off sometimes when there's too much on my plate and say, hey, I really want to do this, but I really can't do this. But it needs to be taken care of. Can you take care of it?
Yeah, and then I think the last piece on that I'd add is, then I think when you're doing that and people see you busy and you're not always looking to do that, like they might even know that delegation might be a weak spot for you, then they are much quicker to raise their hand with stuff. I know with the Engage Foundation, that's a big thing for me, because they know I'm doing all sorts of different stuff and I very rarely ask for help on anything. And then that means when I'm like, hey, yeah, no, are you doing that, Yvonne? No, I'm not. Okay, I'll do it later today. Somebody's going to see that email and go, Camden, I got this. And they can jump on things, and it kind of gives them that freedom to jump to it. And actually, I want to throw that over to you, Dad. How much of that do you think is the idea? Because we talk about this at Tribe and Purpose, the having a team of leaders. How much of it do you think is that, and just like the ownership over the problem set?
I think that's a huge piece of it. Personal ownership. We've talked about that with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. No, that wrong psychologist.
I thought you got that right. No, you got it right. You.
Oh, I did get it right.
Folks out there, we were on a coaching call about 2 months ago, and he started talking about Pavlov's hierarchy of needs, and we were all thinking of Pavlov's dog. So that's
yes.
You're still tripped up on that, Dad. Sorry.
Well, now you got it right. Now I've got the.
I'm gonna start ringing bells.
Oh crap! Personal ownership is huge, and that comes with people wanting to lead, which really leads me to the question I was curious about. How much do you think it's well, let me rephrase it. Are there any volunteers that aren't military spouses?
So yes, we have volunteers that aren't current military spouses. They've retired, their service member has retired, and so they've stayed plugged in. And we also have volunteers that started off as mailing their donations into us, and then they were like, we want to be a part of this. And so like once a year, every spring in the DC area, we don't have a shop in the DC area, but there are tons of military people, so we do a big pop-up event once a year, and these ladies have drove up for the pop-up event just to volunteer with us. And so yes, we do have volunteers that are not in the military, don't have a military connection, and they just want to come out and be a part of what we're doing.
That's really cool that they're doing that, because what I'm trying to distill out of this, because I think there's an interesting secret sauce that can be applied into other businesses with that, because of how it's drawn people in that, call it a purpose fulfillment, even in that sense of, they're serving others, and in that, what's your perspective on that assumption I'm making?
So I think that, there is a purpose. I think that, since 2001, since 9/11, people have wanted to show their support of the military community a lot, right? It very much brought out, it was always there, but it awoken the patriotism of our population, right? But they wanted some tangible way to do that. They don't want to just tie a yellow ribbon on their tree and say we support our troops. They want to feel like they're really doing something, really having an impact, and really connecting. And this allows them to do that. I say it all the time. It's so silly and so simple, free dresses, but it has had so many other effects that we never even dreamed would happen, as a result of just asking people to look in their closets and see if they have some dresses to give us. And I think that's what it's done is it's given them that tangible way to connect to the military community, to show support of the military community, and to show their gratitude to what the military community does for the protection of this country.
I would love if you could kind of give the full spiel, if you will, of what that outcome is. Because I think we talked about it a lot. And I think we can imagine a lot of different things, but it's like, what do the dresses do for folks? Why is this such a big thing? Why does it change lives? That kind of stuff.
So I've told this story a couple of times in a interview, but I think this is like this happened more than once, and it's a great way to kind of encapsulate everything. We were at a grand opening of a shop one time, and when we do the grand openings, people are allowed to come in and shop for their dresses, get their free dresses. And a woman came in, a young military spouse came in. They had just moved to this location. This is their very first location. Her husband had just come out of AIT, which is basically the basic training. Then they go straight to their new installation. And he had come home and said that they had a ball, like they had just got there the week before. They had a ball coming up, but she couldn't go. They couldn't afford for her to go, right? She happened to be out shopping and she heard like grocery shopping, and she had heard about this event. So she came by just to see what it was. She found a dress. She FaceTimes him from the shop and says, I found a dress. Like, can I go to the ball? Blah, 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 blah. Very Cinderella moment, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so they're able to get a ticket donated for them to go. He takes her to the ball. She ends up coming back the following week after the ball was over to tell me about some friends that she had made while at the ball who their service member also worked in the same unit. So now she has people that she's connected to. She came back and asked if she could volunteer in the shop, which I said, of course, yes, you can. So she started being a regular volunteer in the shop and led to other volunteer opportunities, which led to her later when she PCS'd from this location, reaching out and asking me for a reference because she was applying for a job and she was putting this down on her job, on her job application as work experience. But all of that was kind of just just a one thing after another. The people she met at the ball that were in the same unit, that unit ended up deploying. So she had people who were going through the same thing as her while she was going through that. And that could have all been differently had she have been left out of that one event, out of that military ball. She would have got there. Her first thing, she's left out of a fun thing, right? And being told, no, you can't go because we can't afford it, which then sours her because her husband has to still go, but she can't go. And which is your very first military experience, to be left out of the fun stuff, but then you're expected to take the sucky stuff and deal with it. Like it's again, this has happened more than once, but it's just the whole encapsulating story of how it actually does make a difference by just giving somebody a free dress.
And I just want to let everybody know that there is a whole lot of military folks that aren't even 20 years old. And think about what that's like to get married at that age, go away from mom and dad to some strange military installation and figure out the whole, how do you spell commissary? Where's the grocery store, and all these sort of things. And then have that social opportunity that a military ball provides to make that connection. And yeah, how many of them sit at home because, yeah, you're right, the soldier has to go, mandatory fun. And, the spouse, that costs money. Even though we always have the tiered ticket pricing, still costs money that you ain't got. Because let me tell you, living life as a private, that's got to be applying for food stamps to make ends meet most of the time. So
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, again, that's the best story I have to kind of encapsulate it all, and it just it really shows the impact that free dresses is having on the military.
I'm curious, talking about that outcome, which is beautiful. The idea of controlling that outcome is what's coming to mind, and what I mean by that is, so you have these 16, if I got the number right, 16 different shops.
15.
15. All right, sorry. 15, soon to be 16. Come on. No,
I'm
but
sure.
15 different shops, all of these different volunteers working in different capacities there, all of these different dresses, all of these different people who want the dress, the customers, I guess, who want the dresses, right? You go through all of that. How are you, as the leader, helping to make sure that, Janet in Fort Bliss is getting the right dress for her, and that she's going to have a nice experience, and that outcome is exactly what you're talking about in that story? Because there's a lot of variables there.
There are a lot of variables. The cool thing about our inventory itself is it is coming from different dress manufacturers and different individuals from all over the country, meaning all walks of life. Oftentimes, when a person walks into a clothing store, you can walk in and say, this store isn't my style, or that's not going to be, I'm not going to find anything in here for me pretty quickly, right? But that's not the case when you walk into an operation to play your dress. There truly is something for everyone because it's come from all over the country in all walks of life, right? So we don't just have these 5 brands that we carry and we hope that somebody likes those 5 brands. We've got everything. We've got some vintage stuff for people who like vintagey things. We have some stuff that's more plain in case somebody doesn't want to stand out too much. We have some stuff that's got tons of sparkle that people have worn in, beauty pageants and stuff. We've got the full gamut of dresses. So it is very rare that somebody comes into one of our shops and walks out and says they can't find something. I will actually challenge somebody when they tell me they can't find anything and tell them, get in that dressing room and I will start handing you dresses. Like I tell them all the time, you are not a hanger. It's going to look different on you than it does on a hanger. Get in that dressing room and try it on. And 9 times out of 10, they find something. It's just that every now and then there's somebody that's, convinced that they're not going to find anything, and they've convinced themselves so much that they definitely won't find something. But 9 times out of 10, if they say they didn't find anything and I put them in the dressing room, they find something. And so it's just a matter of, making sure that our volunteers understand that we're there to make a great experience for somebody and to make them feel good. It's so much fun to see other shoppers in there. Like they won't even know each other and they're like helping zip each other up and oohing and awing over each other and telling each other how beautiful they look. And it just becomes this feel good, uplifting moment that you couldn't have fabricated even if you tried.
What about beyond the military? Have you looked at partners, because I know there's something. Dang, now I can't think of what it's called. There's something happening here very soon, like Own the Runway or something like that. That is, taking kind of a similar model, but it's.
I know there's Rent the Runway is a big one, but those are more like business. I don't know if there's any non-military nonprofits that do something.
Yeah, this is a nonprofit, local one here in the Springs. I just heard it this morning again, advertisement on the news that the channel supports. So, have you thought about and seen, or is there a way to share that empowering act beyond the military spouse community?
Yeah, so there are a few organizations across the country that we have. Some of them will do what we're doing, but with wedding dresses. And so, oftentimes people will just mail us their donations. And if it's wedding dresses, we'll send them, we'll reach out to one of them and say, hey, we have this inventory that I think could be of great use, but we don't have a use for it. Do you want it? And they've reached out to us, same thing. They do wedding dresses, but they don't do formal gowns. So there is some sharing there. There's also the organization Association of the United States Army, AUSA. They obviously don't do dresses. That's not their thing. They're basically the voice of the Army is how they bill themselves, and they're all over the country, but they're headquartered here in DC. And we entered into an official teaming agreement with them like 7 years ago, which is great because they, take us to different events to let people know that we exist and, how they can support and also how we can support those communities which they take us into. We, in a couple of weeks, will be in DC on their exhibit hall floor. They've got a huge conference every year. And so they bring us and give us this booth space on their exhibit hall floor to talk about how we support the military community. So it's this sea of Army vehicles and weapons and everything, and then a big pink booth right in the middle of it with sparkly dresses. It's always so much fun. But so there are, there are some organizations that are just out there to help us get the word out that we exist, because a lot of times we don't need help doing what we do once people hear about us. It's just a matter of getting the word out that we exist. So yes, there has been some collaboration outside of just us, and definitely some collaboration with other organizations. We were asked by a mortgage company back in May for they were doing a military appreciation fundraiser, and they did a fundraiser to raise funds for us, as well as some other military connected nonprofits. And then as a result, we've been able to stay connected with them and work with them on some initiatives as well. So definitely opportunities out there. Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I tell you, I loved listening to this to get some different understanding in Miss Suzanne's point of view, if you will, as a military spouse. And what I learned, and I thought this was such a key point, that it's not just putting somebody in a dress. The fact that your volunteers are using that as work experience to get a nice paying job, get that, adding that to their resume. There's probably definitely a second order effect that probably wasn't in the cards when you started it. And what a cool thing to do. So that's what I learned, that if you're open to it, there's experiences to be gained to launch you into other things in many different areas. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, I think for me, and I don't know if I learned this, but it's a really good reminder to keep in mind as I've been, having the paid coaches conversation with a lot of my rugby family about that and what that could look like for engage and growth and all those different ideas there. Just the core idea of, letting volunteers do what they want to do and giving them the roles that can fit into what they want, not trying to force, for example, thinking about my pipeline of coaches, not like trying to get an assistant coach to become a head coach, to become a director, to then go up to Phoenix for me and start a club up there. It doesn't really make sense. And just giving people the opportunity to volunteer how they want to, when they want to, what they want to, and how that creates such a good culture for that. And I think that's just, I don't think I'm necessarily bad at that, but it's a really good reminder.
Yvonne, how about you? What'd you learn?
I think that you guys have opened my eyes to the fact that I guess I've never really thought about like a rugby organization, a nonprofit through a rugby organization, but being able to reach out to other nonprofits that don't necessarily deal with dresses, but other nonprofits, just to see how they do things and what they're doing, and see if there are things there that I can adopt and put into how we run Operation A Player Dress. There's always room for growth. But for so many times I've just thought, well, there's not a whole lot else out there like us, so that we have to just figure it out. But some organizations have already figured it out. Just because they're not doing it with dresses doesn't mean that, they couldn't be helpful for us.
I'm sorry, but I got this image in my head, and I don't remember if I've seen it or I'm just making it up, of women playing rugby in formals. I feel like that's probably happened at least
that's
once.
That's a very common thing with women's rugby clubs I've seen.
Okay, all right.
I feel like
that's worth the
there
rabbit
might
hole,
be a collaborative fundraiser there, right?
Ooh,
there we go.
Ooh, I love that.
That military rugby connection is pretty big as well. So
yeah.
Oh yeah,
Camden, we need to have a conversation.
Perfect.
Yeah, because he's got. Do you have one? A shop at Davis Monthan Air Force Base?
I do not, but I have an airplane and I have suitcases. I don't have an airplane, but I can get on an airplane.
I got one of my coaches who works out there, and I'm gonna talk with her on Saturday.
Ooh, there we go. Planting the seed. I love it.
Yes, sir.
I love it. Well, Yvonne, how do folks find you, get in touch with you, see which booth you're going to be at AUSA?
Yes. So our booth at AUSA, we're in the family pavilion. So we're right up front and center of the family pavilion. It's very, very, very easy to find us. Again, we're pink. We're a big pink booth in a sea of army green, so it's pretty easy to find us. We'll be there the 14th through the 16th of October. We have a website, operationdeployyourdress.org. We're on all social media, Operation Deploy Your Dress on Facebook. We have ODYD1 on Instagram, and then Operation Deploy Your Dress on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. I'm so excited for you, and I know your time on the floor at AUSA conference is going to be awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Yvonne.
Thank you both so much for having me. It was a great conversation, and I look forward to chatting with you guys again one day.
All right. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Yvonne Coombes, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, that full archive of episodes is available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.